Deep beneath one of the busiest shipping routes on Earth, an underwater robot has just reached a ship that was never supposed to exist. For nearly 80 years, the SS Ourang Medan was dismissed as a legend, a ghost story sailors told each other in the dark. But the robot's camera did not find a legend. It found a crew that never moved, their positions still frozen where they died, their stations still occupied. And the pattern of those remains defies everything forensic science understands about death at sea. No signs of struggle, no signs of escape, just an entire ship that appears to have stopped in a single moment. So the question is no longer asterisk whether the story happened. Asterisk. The real question is far more disturbing. Asterisk. What killed an entire crew so suddenly that even their bodies never had time to fall? Welcome to Marine Discovery Hub. Asterisk. Now, before we begin this investigation, allow a small request, especially from those watching who carry the wisdom of experience. If you believe the ocean still holds secrets worth uncovering, please consider subscribing to this channel. Think of it as helping a quiet research project continue its work. And before the story unfolds, tell us something in the comments. Where in the world are you watching this investigation from tonight? For decades, the story of the SS Ourang Medan existed in a strange place between history and legend. Maritime researchers knew the distress message. Sailors repeated the story. Historians debated it. Yet no physical evidence had ever confirmed that the ship truly existed. For many experts, Ourang Medan slowly became something that belonged more to folklore than to documented maritime history. That assumption began to change when a private maritime research team launched a deep-sea survey in the waters of the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca is one of the most important shipping corridors in the world. Every year, thousands of cargo vessels pass through this narrow channel, connecting the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Because of its economic importance, the seabed in this region has been studied many times for oil exploration, underwater mapping, and navigation safety. During one of these surveys, an autonomous underwater vehicle was sent down to scan the ocean floor using high-resolution sonar. At first, the data appeared normal. The seabed showed layers of sediment, scattered rocks, and occasional debris from modern shipping activity. But on the fourth day of scanning, the sonar system detected something unusual. A long, symmetrical shape appeared beneath a layer of silt. The object was too regular to be a natural formation. Its dimensions matched those of a mid-20th century cargo freighter. The research team marked the location and prepared a remotely operated vehicle equipped with cameras and lights. When the robot descended, the ocean around it grew darker with every meter. At depth, sunlight disappears completely. Only the robot's floodlights could reveal what lay ahead. Slowly, the shape emerged from the darkness. The hull of a ship rested on the seabed, partially buried in sediment. The steel plating had been heavily damaged by decades of corrosion, but the structure was still recognizable. Sections of railing remained visible. The outline of the cargo hold could still be seen. Most striking of all was the damage around one of the central cargo compartments. The metal there appeared twisted outward, consistent with the effects of an internal explosion. This detail immediately caught the attention of the researchers on the surface vessel. Historical accounts from 1947 had described a mysterious freighter that exploded and sank shortly after being discovered by another ship. If those reports were accurate, the wreck lying beneath the Strait of Malacca might not be an ordinary cargo vessel. It might be the SS Ourang Medan. But identifying a shipwreck is only the first step in a maritime investigation. The real question was far more difficult. If this wreck truly belonged to the Ourang Medan, then it might contain the first physical evidence of a disaster that had puzzled historians for nearly 80 years. To understand the mystery of the SS Ourang Medan, investigators first had to step back into the world of 1947. It was a time when global trade routes were still recovering from the shock of the Second World War. Ports across Asia were reopening, colonial governments were collapsing, and military supply chains were slowly transforming back into commercial shipping networks. On paper, the war had ended 2 years earlier. In reality, the economic system that moved goods across the oceans was still unstable. The Strait of Malacca sat at the center of that instability. This narrow waterway had always been one of the most important maritime corridors on Earth. Any ship traveling between Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia often passed through this channel. Even in the 1940s, thousands of tons of cargo moved through the strait every week. But in the years immediately after the war, the region faced another problem. No one had complete control over what was moving through these waters. The Dutch colonial administration was struggling to maintain authority in the Dutch East Indies. At the same time, Indonesian independence movements were gaining strength. Military forces from several countries still operated in the region, and vast quantities of wartime equipment remained scattered across Southeast Asia. Among the most dangerous of these materials were chemical weapons and experimental military compounds. During the war, both the Axis and Allied powers had developed new types of chemical agents. Some were stored in remote depots. Others had been transported across Asia during military campaigns. When the war ended, many of these stockpiles were supposed to be destroyed. However, historical records showed that destruction programs were incomplete. In several cases, hazardous materials were quietly moved by sea to new locations. These shipments did not always appear in official trade records. Sometimes the cargo was listed under vague descriptions. In other cases, the vessels carrying it operated with unclear documentation. This is where the story of the Ourang Medan becomes economically and strategically interesting. Researchers who later examined maritime records discovered something unusual. The ship's registration could not be confirmed in the archives of Lloyd's of London, the organization responsible for tracking most commercial vessels of the time. A cargo ship traveling through one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, with no confirmed registration, no verified ownership, and no cargo manifest. For historians, this raised a critical question. Ships do not normally operate this way unless the cargo they carry cannot appear in official records. In the chaotic economic environment of 1947, such operations were not impossible. In fact, they were sometimes necessary for governments and institutions trying to move dangerous materials quietly across international waters. If the Ourang Medan was part of such an operation, then its voyage through the Strait of Malacca may have been more than an ordinary trading mission. It may have been part of a hidden logistics network created by the political and economic chaos of the post-war world. Maritime disasters usually follow patterns. Ships collide with reefs. Engines fail. Fires spread through cargo holds. Storms overwhelm vessels that cannot escape the waves. In almost every recorded case, the evidence left behind tells a clear story about what went wrong. But the case of the SS Ourang Medan never followed those patterns. When the American merchant ship Silver Star approached the drifting vessel in 1947, the crew expected to find survivors or signs of damage. The distress signal they had received suggested something serious had happened on board. Instead, they found something far stranger. The ship itself appeared structurally intact. There were no signs of collision with another vessel. The deck showed no evidence of a violent storm. The hull remained above water, and the vessel was still floating normally. From a distance, it looked like a ship that had simply lost power. But when the boarding party stepped onto the deck, they immediately realized something was wrong. The entire crew was dead. They were not gathered in one place. They were not lying near the lifeboats. They were not piled near the railings as people often are when they try to escape danger at sea. Instead, the crew members were found exactly where they had been working. Some were on the bridge, others were inside the chart room. Engineers were discovered in the engine area. One man was still near the radio equipment. It looked as if the ship had been frozen in time. Witnesses later reported something even more unsettling. Many of the bodies appeared to show expressions of fear. Several men were described with their arms partially raised, as if reacting to something they could see but could not escape. Even the ship's dog had died in a similar posture. Yet the boarding crew could find no obvious cause for these deaths. There was no sign of poisoning equipment. No evidence of fire spreading through the compartments. No flooding below decks. No bullet holes or signs of violence. The ship appeared calm and silent. From a scientific perspective, this raised a serious forensic problem. When people die suddenly aboard a ship, their bodies normally fall to the floor. Over time, natural movement inside the vessel caused by waves, gravity, and decages their positions. But witnesses reported that the crew of the Ourang Medan seemed to have died where they stood. If these accounts were accurate, it meant the crew had experienced something extremely unusual. Something that caused instant incapacitation. Something fast enough that the human body had no time to react normally. And that raised the most troubling question of the entire investigation. What kind of event could stop an entire crew in the middle of their work, without leaving any visible damage to the ship itself? By the time modern researchers examined the historical reports, one pattern became difficult to ignore. Everything about the SS Ourang Medan suggested that the ship was operating outside normal commercial systems. Its registration could not be verified. Its cargo manifest never appeared in maritime archives. Even its ownership remained uncertain. For historians and economic analysts, such gaps rarely occur by accident. Ships moving ordinary goods do not disappear from documentation. Ships transporting sensitive materials sometimes do. To understand this possibility, investigators began examining the types of cargo that were secretly moving through Southeast Asia during the late 1940s. The end of the Second World War had left large stockpiles of military chemicals scattered across several territories. Both Japan and Germany had produced advanced chemical agents during the war. When their military structures collapsed, some of these materials remained in storage facilities across Asia. Allied authorities issued orders to destroy many of these stockpiles. However, historical records show that not every shipment was immediately eliminated. Some were temporarily moved to different locations while governments decided how to handle them. Transporting such materials created a difficult problem. Chemical agents are extremely dangerous when stored improperly. If containers fail or ventilation systems carry the vapor through enclosed spaces, the effects can spread quickly throughout a vessel. In extreme cases, exposure can disable a person within seconds. Researchers studying the Ourang Medan incident noticed that this type of exposure could explain several unusual details reported by the boarding crew: the sudden deaths, the positions of the bodies, the expressions that witnesses described. Even the final distress call sent by the radio operator suggested that events unfolded extremely quickly. If a toxic substance escaped inside the cargo hold, the gas could have moved through the ship's ventilation system within minutes. Crew members in different parts of the vessel would have been affected almost simultaneously. From a scientific perspective, such an event could produce exactly the kind of scene that the rescuers reported. However, proving this theory remains difficult. The ship exploded shortly after the boarding party attempted to tow it toward port. The blast destroyed much of the physical evidence that investigators might have studied. When the wreck sank beneath the waters of the Strait of Malacca, whatever cargo had been stored in the hold disappeared with it. For decades, this lack of evidence allowed the incident to remain a mystery. Now, the discovery of a wreck on the ocean floor has reopened the question. The underwater robot has shown that the ship may still exist, resting quietly beneath layers of sediment and corrosion. If future expeditions examine the wreck in greater detail, they may finally determine whether the Ourang Medan carried cargo that governments preferred never to document. Until then, the story remains a warning. Not every disaster at sea begins with storms or mechanical failure. Sometimes the most dangerous cargo on a ship is the cargo that no one is willing to record.